Bitwise Industries. We believe in the untapped potential of underestimated humans.
We believe underestimated humans are the answer to a representative tech workforce.
We believe in leveraging this tech workforce and public-private partnerships to build and strengthen digital infrastructure equitably in underserved cities.
We believe that revitalized, vibrant downtowns promote entrepreneurship. We're Bitwise Industries. Join the movement.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to our conversation today. My name is Laura Maristany, and I'm the Vice President of External Affairs for Bitwise Industries and our navigator for the conversation today. A very special thanks to the National League of Cities for their partnership as we seek to highlight successful examples of cross-sector efforts to increase digital equity across our communities. Here with us today and on behalf of the National League of Cities is Hayward Harbin, NLC's Director of Strategic Partnerships, to say a few words.
Thank you so much. Bitwise has been an NLC partner since 2021, and they've been a great resource to our members. Through high-quality thought leadership, like you'll see on this webinar and on previous webinars and blogs that are available on nlc.org, they've earned a reputation among cities, towns, and villages as one of the most comprehensive approaches to creating digital equity for the most underserved. I encourage everyone here to take a few minutes to visit nlc.org/partnerships to learn more about Bitwise Industries and the other private sector leaders that are committed to promoting NLC's mission to serve cities, towns, and villages across the country. I will now turn it back over to the Bitwise team.
Thank you, Hayward. We're grateful for the opportunity to again work closely with the National League of Cities and with member cities. And we also are very grateful for your leadership helping to amplify models that work. In today's conversation, we will discuss how public-private partnerships across California, New Mexico, and Alabama have worked to educate communities on the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP. These days, everybody is talking about digital infrastructure, especially many of the folks that are joining us today. But what does that really all entail? Expanding internet access and meaningful access to technology doesn't just happen because you literally put fiber or Wi-Fi somewhere. The answers to what it will take to bring all people in our nation into the digital economy lie in the places where the most disconnected and underserved communities live. In this webinar, you will learn about how these partnerships are leveraging what started as the Emergency Broadband Benefit, now the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP, to connect the most underserved to the internet and open doors to engage communities meaningfully to the digital economy. We will discuss CTC technology and energy and Bitwise Industries outreach strategies that have helped districts enroll families into the Affordable Connectivity Program and benefits moving forward. Truth be told, there are so many incredible leaders and organizations who have stepped up to ensure people across the country are able to access the ACP, including many of you joining us today. This conversation is much more focused on what the back end of that outreach looks like and why it matters how cities and other organizations build the infrastructure to deploy it. The specific examples we will talk about today were led by the most diverse tech workforce in the country. Behind the outreach to connect folks to the ACP was a concerted effort to develop untapped talent, to lead said efforts, and connect with people like them to pull them into the internet economy meaningfully. This story was not just about creating another call center. It is about how those centers are set up and run, but more importantly, about who is leading them. The leaders joining us in this conversation have been at the forefront of educating families and developing strategies to ensure communities across the country are aware and can take advantage of the ACP. They have led efforts leveraging proactive outreach through call center to support eligible families connecting to the benefits. And we're super excited to hear more about what the front lines of proactive outreach on the ACP look like and how other cities can leverage call centers as a service to increase access for the most underestimated in their communities and to meaningfully take advantage of broadband infrastructure into the future. I would now like to invite each of our panelists, which I will call on, to introduce themselves and tell us more about what brings them to the conversation today. So I'll invite Joanne to briefly introduce herself, followed by Joaquin and then Esperanza. Joanne?
Well, thank you, Laura. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. And thank you, Bitwise and NLC, for hosting me here today. So I'm president of CTC Technology and Energy. And since the advent of the commercial internet in the mid-1990s, I've worked with state and local government and tribal government to try to address public policy priorities around communications infrastructure and access to the internet, particularly in the broadband era. And what we've learned over the years is that some of the greatest challenges are making this remarkable platform and resource available to our neighbors and our friends who struggle most to access it. We finally have a tool in the form of the Affordable Connectivity Program that Congress has given us, with the federal government finally recognizing what is necessary. And I think what's so exciting to me about this conversation is that we're talking about how that tool can be leveraged by states and localities. So that's why I'm here, and I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to contribute to a discussion about what the public role can be in making that new program accessible to those Americans who struggle most to access the internet.
Thanks, Joanne, and we're so grateful for your leadership in this space, which we are looking forward to digging into during the conversation. Joaquin.
Yeah, I'm Joaquin Alvarado with Studio To Be. So, I first met Joanne 20 years ago when then Mayor Gavin Newsom decided that he wanted to see free Wi-Fi in San Francisco. So Joanne and I go way back, and I would attest to the fact that what we're going to really dig into is the power of partnership and how long it takes. And many of you who are joining us, and I see a lot of the cities, it's been a multi-decade an effort to really resolve the digital divide. And we finally have something in the ACP that is ubiquitous. It's simple. It's not simple to sign up, so we'll talk about that, but it's simple in its model and has full participation from the ISPs also. So usually we had a lot of tension sometimes between what everybody thought we should be doing. Everybody pretty much agrees that the ACP is good for the country, and the sooner we get people signed on, the better we'll all be in our communities. So, I work in communications, I work in stakeholder development, and I do a lot of community engagement work. And that I've been a bit of a bridge with Joanne and CTC and the Bitwise team, and really happy to dive in and share some of what we've learned.
Thanks, Joaquin. And Esperanza, welcome. We're so excited that you were able to join us to really talk through what the back end of all of this actually looks like and what cities can expect to see if they are looking at initiatives to engage similar call center efforts. So if you could just quickly introduce yourself, that would be great. We can't hear you, Esperanza.
Thank you for having me. My name is Esperanza Perez, and I am the call center apprentice lead. And so my role in this is to facilitate, train the call center agents to reach out to these families, reach out to all these individuals, and spread awareness about this program to get as many people signed up for this wonderful benefit. And so I hope to share more about that throughout this talk.
Thank you so much, Esperanza. And we'll get to talk a little bit with Esperanza about the Bitwise model and how and who is actually behind a lot of the projects that the technology solutions side of the company develops across our communities. So thanks again for taking the time to come and tell us more about the call center outreach efforts that you've all been leading and how those can support city efforts to ensure meaningful adoption of broadband. But before we jump in, maybe let's take a little bit of a step back. And I'm hoping that Joanne can chime in here and help us level set and give us a little bit of a foundation about the Affordable Connectivity Program and these programs, what they mean for our audience. So Joanne, it would be helpful if you could walk us through what the ACP is and why cities should care and have plans to leverage it.
Thanks, Laura. So the Affordable Connectivity Program is really the first or the most substantial federal appropriation to support low-income Americans to access the internet ever. There are other programs that have floated around that have much more modest amounts of funding in them, primarily the Lifeline program, which was created by the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and is, actually in some ways dates back to the Reagan administration, but was put into statute in 1996, and that provide a very small subsidy for voice service. But ACP is the most powerful subsidy tool to support low-income families that has been created in the broadband era for broadband data services. And it is particularly powerful because it is structured, I think, very successfully as a win-win, as between policymakers and people who are very concerned about making sure that all Americans are connected to this platform that now is the dominant platform for our economy and our democracy, the broadband internet. And that's policymakers at the state, local, and federal level. And for the ISPs, who are actually very big supporters of this program because in many ways it creates the opportunity for them to realize revenues from low-income households that they had not previously been able to count as customers. And that is the business they are in, is realizing revenues from providing services. So it's a whole new class of customers for them. And then it is obviously, most importantly, this incredibly consequential win for those households who can't afford to pay for broadband internet service. It's a $30 a month subsidy. It's higher for people living on tribal lands, but for most low-income Americans, it's $30 a month. And the availability or the eligibility for the program is relatively broad. It's actually quite generous. There's lots of detail to this, but one way to understand it is that it goes up to about 200% of federal poverty. Anybody who fits in that category and receives any kind of federal support is eligible for this program. And that is very powerful. There's more than $14 billion in the program. It's projected to not run out of funds for years to come. And hopefully, given the level of support it has received, the fact that it was a bipartisan creation of Congress, it's supported by policymakers in red states and policymakers in blue states, policymakers in rural areas and in cities. Hopefully, we will see Congress choose to extend the program. But in the meantime, it is the most powerful tool that local governments have ever had to connect low-income households to the internet at a time when we increasingly understand that internet access is foundational from a civic engagement, economic, healthcare, educational, and other standpoint. So in many ways, it is the most powerful, unique, and newest tool that cities have at their disposal. And because it is relatively time limited, because we don't know when or if Congress will re-up on this, and I'm going to trust it will several years down the road. But in the meantime, every minute that is wasted not connecting the households who are eligible to this program is a wasted minute. So I just commend it as, I think, just a unique and really remarkable thing that cities have been waiting for a long time, and it is now at their disposal.
Thanks, Joanne. So important. And again, just the right time to be able to have this conversation so that cities can start to think through, if they haven't already, how do they set up this infrastructure so that they can make sure that their constituents are connected. And I know, the frameworks vary across cities and localities in terms of like who's leading the efforts. In the case of New Mexico, it was a government initiative. And so I'm hoping that Joanne can chime in again and kick us off and start talking about what that in particular looked like. Just a little bit in the lead up to that, in the summer of 2021, for folks just to be aware, Bitwise Industries was recruited as a partner with CTC Technology and Energy to provide contact service as a center solutions for statewide broadband inclusion efforts in New Mexico. With what started as the Emergency Broadband Benefit, but turned into the Affordable Connectivity Program. This project, known as New Mexico Student Connect, and CTC was leading the charge. So I'm hoping that Joanne, you can kick us off, and could you talk to us a little bit more about what New Mexico Student Connect is, the goals of the project, and where it is today.
Yep, thank you. So New Mexico Student Connect was very much a recognition of the fact that this was a unique moment and that there was this new resource. Lots of detail. It started focused on the Emergency Broadband Benefit, which was a very short-term benefit that Congress created in the context of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, but very quickly pivoted to the Affordable Connectivity Program when it was created by the IIJA. And New Mexico Student Connect was an initiative of the Public Education Department of the state of New Mexico to try to provide the resources and the support for low-income students throughout the state who are eligible for the program. Is a pretty considerable number of students, as is the case in every state of all demographics. There's widespread eligibility to try to provide the resources to help those student households to get this benefit, because we all know that those who are least likely to have the means to afford broadband internet service are likely to be the households who are hardest to reach with certain kinds of information. And trying to bridge that particular informational gap, it was the key goal of New Mexico Student Connect. What it involved was, and it's based, by the way, on a best practice developed during the pandemic, in the early months of the pandemic in the state of Alabama, as an effort to try to reach Alabama students who were not connected because of poverty and required the internet in order to distance learn. And the lessons that were learned in pioneering outreach efforts there were then adapted for New Mexico in order to do several things. First of all, to make sure that there was an outreach campaign and an informational and educational campaign to try to reach as many folks where they live and where they work and where they play as possible by leveraging local partners, by using digital and analog communications tools to reach those families and to advise them, there is a program and we are here to help. There is a way that we can help you to navigate the program if you don't know how to do it yourself. An 800 number publicized and made available, and then a call center set up speaking all the relevant languages. And in New Mexico, there were 4 languages that were staffed for that call center of people who are trained and experienced at working with households to get them connected to these kinds of benefits. And then in addition to receiving calls because of that outreach campaign that leveraged all kinds of trusted partners like social service agencies, school districts, libraries, nonprofits, etc., there was also an outgoing campaign where the call center was also in partnership with state agencies who, subject to all the appropriate protections for personally identifiable information, provided phone numbers of the folks who they believed could benefit from this. The call center was making outgoing calls to those households, explaining what the ACP is and offering to help to navigate the process. Because although the program itself is easy to understand, $30 subsidy for broadband service, it's actually, unfortunately, really difficult to navigate, particularly if you don't currently have internet access or you're not accustomed to dealing with these sorts of things. And the folks in the call center receiving inbound calls and making outbound calls were trained to be able to help those households to navigate that process and to make it less burdensome. That's the heart of New Mexico Student Connect. It's connected a lot of households over the course of the past year, and I think has really reinforced and established a best practice for how to reach the families who most need this benefit and who, frankly, despite the best intentions of the policymakers in Washington, D.C., have been the ones who have been least likely to benefit because they're least likely to know about and be able to access the benefit.
And
Thanks,
Joanne,
Joanne.
if I can just tap in here, Lauda, I don't mean to jump in, but I think
I was just gonna transition to you. So,
well, I'm very excited because this we learned a lot, right? And I can't stress enough the all hands on deck nature of New Mexico's response. And so Joanne knows we were in weekly meetings with 30 people, including the Secretary of Education, who had a very direct relationship to what these outcomes were for families. We also had the strength of the governor's commitment to ensure that we could, tap for partnership other state agencies. So just an incredible amount of focus, but you have to have almost a social worker's, sort of instincts. So all of the ground level engagement that allowed us to understand as we were doing these calls and doing all the other marketing and collateral, that communities could reach back to us, and that there was ways to really try to customize, whether it was in a tribal or pueblo environment or extremely rural communities like Reserve, New Mexico. And I think Melanie Goodman's on from Senator Lujan's office. I facilitated some sessions in Reserve. It's a population of about 300 people. And I think we had about 150 to 200 people show up for 2 different community sessions. So as the course of the year sort of developed, we really got an incredible amount of community engagement and support, and strategies emerged from that, which allowed us again to raise our own EQ for when we're out there making the phone calls, to make sure that we really knew how to respond to people. Because I mean, my mom was a social worker, my sister's a social worker, so I've learned a lot from them. But when you're dealing with folks who are experiencing the challenges of the pandemic, on top of really systemic issues around poverty and access, which have created the digital divide, right, for rural Americans, for communities of color, you name it. And New Mexico had a lot of those kinds of challenges. You really have to think about having that empathy when you try to move people through the process. And that's speaking the languages that they're most comfortable in. It's also being patient with them and creating that kind of relationship of trust. And the schools were instrumental in this. So every single school district deserves credit for really being our partner in making sure that folks knew about the program.
Thanks, Joaquin. And I was going to transition and also ask you to talk a little bit about where the data, what the data is saying about the impact of the program now that it's been running for a number of years.
Yeah, and I will give credit again to the FCC. I mean, you can download this data once a month. You can get zip code level data about how your community is doing. And I see folks from Dayton, Daytona Beach, Cheviot, Alaska, if I'm saying that correctly. So we got a lot of parts of the country here. Your zip code level data, it's not household level, but it's zip code level data, gets updated once a month, and it's available on the ACP website. I strongly recommend folks just start by looking at your numbers. And if you take the poverty rate for the state, and in New Mexico, we kind of went with the conservative middle of the road, like 17.5%. That means that 35% of the state of New Mexico is theoretically eligible for this program, roughly, give or take. We're very proud of the fact that through this work, one of the main forces for outreach is what we were doing. New Mexico is number 2 in the country for ACP enrollment as of last week. Louisiana is in first. So that's a point of impact that I think will have lasting, sort of positive benefits, of course. But there's actually a way for communities to think, like set some targets initially for, hey, if we're at this percentage and we think we can be up here, you can now start to look at your zip code level data to think about community partners, from libraries to schools to the DMV, motor vehicle departments. Where do you have those points of presence where if you're underperforming in certain zip codes where you know that the poverty rates are going to be higher, you can start to create some targeted strategies around that. So very proud and celebrate New Mexico. My wife's family's from New Mexico, so I think it's a major accomplishment. But back to Joanne's earlier point, the sooner we get as many community members as are qualified enrolled, I think that creates positive incentives for Congress in a nonpartisan way to continue to do something that's really, really good for the country and also good for the marketplace, because it's creating jobs and customers for the ISPs.
That's awesome. Thanks, Joaquin. So Esperanza, we're going to take it to the much more grassroots level. And so I really want you to help frame for us being behind the day-to-day and the infrastructure and actually doing the outbound and inbound calling. So you really help set up a lot of the infrastructure in some of the efforts that we're talking about, and continue to manage the day-to-day of these outreach efforts. Can you say a little bit more about what that specifically looks like, and also can help us walk through who is behind that infrastructure? Who's behind the phone?
Well, we have a team of agents that are extremely knowledgeable about ACP, and they deliver that information, of course, with exceptional customer service and professionalism. But our approach is a little bit more different than just giving the information. The goal is to reach as many families as possible. And so we focus on the quality of each and every call. And our approach in doing this is to recognize that there's a human on the other end of that call. And we don't know what's happening in that household. We don't know if it's a single parent struggling to make ends meet, a grandmother taking on the role of guardianship, or maybe someone who just lost their job. And so we believe, what sets us apart from others is that our team genuinely cares about helping the people that we're reaching out to. They have great empathetic hearts, and they put that aspect of what we are doing first and foremost in every call, one call at a time. And so as a result, when our agents are reaching out to these families, the families often express emotional feelings of gratitude and appreciation that we took the time to go above and beyond, not just connecting them to this valuable resource, but by doing so with patience, kindness, and just acknowledging them as more than just someone that we need to call or check off our list, but rather someone that we all truly want to help.
Esperanza, one thing just to take a little bit of a step back is to highlight a little bit about Bitwise and specifically how our model works when we are talking about a lot of the solutions. So I know a lot of our folks are coming from stories of systemic poverty, but in particular, it is our apprenticeship program that is really driving a lot of this. Can you say a little bit more about specifically the cohorts of folks that are behind, paired with senior staff such as yourself to develop the infrastructure that is staffing a lot of these efforts?
Yes, so we have a group of apprentices, call center apprentices, that are trained in all the necessary skills to make this work happen. And they come from all diverse backgrounds, and they often can understand on a personal level these families that we're reaching out to. And so using that, what we call Bitwise heart, in our work helps to facilitate and helps in the success in our efforts of reaching out to these families and getting to know them, getting that trust on a personal level, so that when we give them the information, they take that information and they can trust that it's legit and that they can go and apply for this program. And so this group that we have now is wonderful. And again, they come from all different backgrounds. They speak the different languages that are necessary to reach out to these families, and all different age groups and all different levels of technical skills.
That's great.
They have been very successful.
And just to quickly add on that as well, one of the stories I really love that our CEOs have talked about is some of the folks that we have worked with to connect to the benefit end up becoming curious about technology now that they're coming into the system and have higher speeds and have better access. And a lot of those folks end up coming to Bitwise and through our training programs and becoming technologists themselves, able to serve their communities. So it really is a story about how do we engage people meaningfully in the digital economy. So I want to pass it to Joaquin. I know one of the partners that we have worked closely with, and Joanne can also chime in here, has been one of the public schools in Las Cruces. So I wonder if both of you could just take a minute to talk a little bit more about that partnership, and then Joaquin, maybe you can help introduce Josh.
Yeah, and just 30 seconds on a couple of quick things. And I think it really matters, right? Like this digital navigation is really key for any kind of government services and healthcare, education, you name it. And we learned something that we didn't know at the beginning, which was this question of grandparents really having to step up. In Alabama, we sort of got the first clue of this, but in New Mexico, it's very, very true, where grandparents were hosting family members, or they take the kids certain days of the week because people are working. And so we started to understand when we were promoting it, it was the public education department. So we were talking to, households that were enrolled in school, but there's this broader community network, right? That especially low income communities have to have, and it's a great part of of how they survive and thrive is, it's multi-generational. So just a peg for folks there. Yeah, like I said, the schools were just incredible partners. Las Cruces is an incredible community. Patrick from the CTC team and I worked very closely with a number of them, and Las Cruces was just the star of the show in some respects. Reserve New Mexico also did awesome, many great stars of the show, but they were highly engaged. We ended up spending a lot of time with individual principals. We presented to the school board, and at the middle of this was Josh Silver, who's the CTO for the schools. And I will just, one other peg here, which I think is really important, is these things don't happen in a vacuum, right? Broadband initiatives are interconnected between city agencies, government, statewide initiatives, libraries. It's a lot of people have to show up to make them successful. And so when we started partnering with Las Cruces, this connection from the state education department to the school district, from the school district to the school site, that was the terrain that we were able to really have a lot of success in reaching out to folks. So Josh would have joined us, but has been in conference land all summer. So I think we're going to hear a little message from him.
Yeah, let's listen to Josh, and then I'll bring back Joanne to talk a little bit more about that partnership.
So good morning. My name is Josh Silver. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Las Cruces Public Schools in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And I'm sorry I'm not there with you in another format. I'm actually in New Orleans right now. I tried to set myself up so you could see, but didn't work too well. But I'm here for the ISTE conference. So I apologize I couldn't be with you, but definitely wanted to share with you some of the work that we have been doing in Las Cruces and partner with the Public Education Department and our partners there with CTC. So I wanted to let you know that one of the main things that, and first I would preface this by saying I'm incredibly thankful for the work that Patrick and Joaquin and their teams did. I see that as instrumental work for Las Cruces Public Schools and the 24,000 students we serve. So when we were introduced to that PED-supported team, the team that I work with in Las Cruces, we focused that time and attention on reaching out and making personal individual connections with the families that we knew were going to need support. And in this case, that was specifically about internet connectivity in the home. And at that time, making sure families had both the information and the knowledge about the Emergency Broadband Benefit program. So I'm very thankful for the work that they did. They stood up the service or the call center for us and reached out to the families in our community that would benefit from that, and then continued to reach out to them. And so I've been very thankful for that. And we've seen definite results from that. We've not only seen families work specifically with them to get signed up for internet, and also get signed up for like hardware resources, which was definitely part of that as well. There were different, like Comcast and different organizations that had a lower price like personal computer for students or families. And so we partnered with CTC and really saw those results and saw families moving away from like a LCPS supported internet to an internet provider under EBB. I'm very thankful for that. Another thing we saw though was just increased information and increased knowledge around words like broadband and connectivity and sort of what that means, and like one-to-one, and some of these terms that maybe were familiar to me or to us. We really relied on CTC to help us sort of get families that information in a digestible way that made sense to them. Seen huge results for that. We actually did that a couple of different rounds. I think Joaquin calls it like the orbits. So we sort of connected the first orbit with families and students that we knew were looking for internet, and then we did it again, and sort of narrowed that down, and have continued to narrow that down and get a little more granular. I would also add that in our community we have a small but quickly growing refugee community. Many of these students are Afghan students. I reached out to Joaquin and his team really quickly, just to give them that information and make sure that they knew that was a need in our community. They've continued to offer a variety of services for us and are constantly kind of looking at ways that we can continue to refine that work. And so again, very thankful for that. The third thing I want to mention is, so the first two, that would be the emergency broadband and the refugee work. The third I'd like to mention is the very tangible sort of poster campaign we did I'd asked the CT colleagues, our colleagues at CTC, if they were able to help me get some English and Spanish posters into our schools, places, especially when the buildings opened again, places like school gymnasiums, bus lots, things like that. That gave families this information in both English and Spanish. And again, we have those. We have those for most of our campuses, including campuses with the maybe highest potential for internet sign up. So there's a gap there between who we know has signed up versus who we know is eligible to sign up. So we've really targeted those schools. And we'll continue to do that. So that's work that we start school in Las Cruces in 3 weeks. And so that'll be work that we continue to do in full force with our campuses. And just on a separate note, all of that wonderful work I'm very thankful for. I think you've heard that a couple times. We couldn't have done this ourselves. We saw the lift. We knew what we needed to do and the ways we needed to reach families, and we knew that we didn't have the resources to do that ourselves in Las Cruces. So incredibly thankful for the partnership and Joaquin and Patrick's friendship and their true commitment to our community. It's made a huge difference. So again, sorry I can't be there. Sorry I can't give you a better picture of New Orleans. It's a really cool view. And hope you have a great one. Thank you all. Josh Silver, Las Cruces Public Schools. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thanks for your leadership, Josh, and hopefully we can get together soon in person to talk some more about the great work you're leading in Las Cruces. Joanne, this was a massive education effort, and we heard Josh talk about the partnership with Patrick. I wonder if you could add a little bit more color to what that looked like on the ground, and then I'll bring Esperanza in to tell us a little bit more about the specific questions. Give us a sample of some of the questions we get through the call center. Joanne.
Yeah, that was really something, listening to Josh share that, and incredibly gratifying, and made me very proud and more thrilled than I generally am. And I'm always thrilled to be doing this work, but that was a particularly good moment. This is this amazing collaborative opportunity, and I think that there is no scenario in which this gets done without local partners like libraries, schools, local nonprofits, social service agencies, the community anchor institutions in the community who are engaged with the community and who know them best. But there is this critical role for states and cities in coordinating, in planning, in leveraging resources, and helping with grant applications to fund a lot of this work, in coordinating the ACP outreach work with other kinds of funding programs. So for example, one of the things that happened in New Mexico is there happened to be a funding opportunity through the FCC at that moment for connectivity and devices, and that was layered on with the ACP outreach, and significant new resources came into the state as a result of that effort. This mix of local energy and ideas and knowledge of the community with the coordinating and very instrumental role that the state or the city government can play in bringing the stakeholders together and helping them to do this in an efficient way where they're not all trying to reinvent that wheel. That is, I think, what is one of the great lessons learned in New Mexico and in Alabama before it. And it's just really, actually, I got kind of emotional listening to Josh speak about that, because I think he deserves a huge amount of the credit for the work that was accomplished in his community.
That's amazing. Esperanza, just going back a little bit to okay, so what's actually behind it? Can you talk a little bit about some of the typical questions that you're getting through the call center from folks?
Yes, of course. So we have general questions about, where and how they can apply, the two-step application process, eligibility questions about participating broadband providers. One question that comes to mind, and it's one that we get very often, is how can this program help me get the internet? Many families we get the pleasure of speaking to have absolutely no internet access. And so what we're hearing from the families is, they want the internet, they know it will be beneficial to their children and to themselves, but they don't have the internet services because maybe it's a financial burden, or they live in an area with inadequate internet access, or maybe it's a lack of digital or computer literacy. And so our agents are trained to help navigate them to the resources and ways to apply, even if they don't have the internet right then and there. So, for example, we can direct them to request mail-in applications. We sometimes ask them to reach out to trusted family member or friends to help them, do the application online. And many times we ask them to, contact their local public library to ask them if they have computers that are accessible to the public so that they can apply, for these programs and ultimately get signed up for ACP and internet services. And so we make every attempt to provide a clear explanation or answer to their question, or navigate them to a solution when it comes to ACP and the application process.
So helpful. With that, I'm going to transition a little bit. I know we have several questions from our audience and folks listening in, and some of them related more specifically to the outreach pieces, and then some of them related to what cities can do themselves to help build this infrastructure. And, to one point I want to pull out before I transition about what Esperanza was just saying is that if you're a city, and even if you think, hey, most of our folks are connected, I think, what we're learning is there's just so many people that are actually completely shut out of the digital economy that they don't even show up on your data. And so this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to reach out to those folks and to be able to engage them. You're spending all of these other dollars, not only on broadband infrastructure, but now you're also spending a lot of dollars in developing better technologies for the city to reach constituents. And there's just all of these folks that live in the dark that we need to make a concerted effort to bring in. And so this is the conversation that we're having today. And we really want you to lean on the folks in this conversation moving forward so that these folks and other community organizations that are leading set efforts can help you build this infrastructure, can help you leverage historic resources to connect these folks to the internet and to be able to take advantage of everything else that you're putting in place. So I'm going to go in, and if folks have questions as we're going through some of the ones in the Q&A, please drop them in there and we'll try to get to them. So I'll just throw them out, and whoever wants to jump in from the session, please do. So the first question that we have is, do we help customers fill out the application? And I think it sounds like a simple question, but it's not necessarily a simple question. So who wants to jump in here and talk through that?
But Esperanza's over here for me. I mean, you should take that one.
Okay. So we don't help them fill it out, meaning like we don't sit with them on the line while they go line by line on the application. However, we do, in certain circumstances, we have a lot of patience and we help navigate them through it. We kind of direct them on where to go. Sometimes they'll be on the phone with us and we, direct them onto the website, direct them on what to click on. There is a digital literacy problem. And so we do try our best to make sure that they are getting actually connected, not just hearing the information, but getting on and applying for it. So we help them in the sense that we help navigate them to the website through the application, but we don't sit there and fill it out with them because a lot of the information is sensitive and confidential. And so we believe that there should be a divide, but we do help navigate them, to fill out and complete that application so they can get those services.
If I can add to that.
Oh, yes, John, go ahead.
There's obviously appropriately extreme consideration of personally identifiable information and privacy, and that is built into all our processes, to Esperanza's point. So the process can be as granular as supporting them to fill out the application, but without our folks at the help desk actually having any of the information themselves that would be not appropriate for us to know of or be collecting. But it can be pretty granular because it's designed to be a real support structure. And there are many low-income families who have a wireless device. They'll have one of these even though they don't have home internet. So we can help them to do it on this, or we can help them to do it on a piece of paper that they can then mail in. Because if you don't have any internet access, it turns out the analog way is the only way to apply. The other critical piece that I think is important to note is that the team is trained, and this is the most important thing, as those of you out there are thinking about building programs like this, that your help desk folks need to be able to direct the families that speak to them to the right ISP. So there's a list of national ISPs. There's a list of ISPs who are all participating in the Affordable Connectivity Program, who have made a commitment that they will provide services under it, but it doesn't mean that they can serve that household in that location. So what the call center team does is it helps that family to identify the options that they might have, and hopefully they have more than one option in a given place, although in many places it's one at best. And then to understand what the offerings are, to understand what the products are, to understand how not to be upsold, and how to get the product that is at the right speed for them and at the right price for them. So protecting them as consumers as well as supporting them to access a new product. And the team should be trained to do all of those things so that this is something that really puts the needs of that low income household at the center from beginning to end of the process.
I could not agree more with both Esperanza and Joanne here on this. And I would just pull out that word patience also, because it's like any other benefit you're trying to get folks subscribed to. It takes a lot of time and energy, and it's not about rushing through or fast conversions, right? Because you really do have to answer questions and think in partnership with where else information is coming at them from. So I think all of that is just super, super critical. One other thing I would just tap in here with is I can't overstate the importance of multilingual. Because if you are a monolingual, and I'm from California, the Southeast Asian population is large in California. You've got to really have a way to address that. I think that's one of the key pieces to all of this, Lauda, and why it's been successful. And it's, again, these are simple lessons. If you work in government, you know this already, but really connecting the dots all the way down on this program is something where I think we've got some really good, important sort of indicators here of what's really worked for ACP in both Alabama and New Mexico.
Yeah. So related to this, there's a question that opens up the door to talk a little bit about what the outreach efforts look like. We touched a little bit on it, but we have a question. Is there a role for ethnic media associations to help in mass communication outreach? So I wonder, Joaquin, if you want to take a shot.
I have been dying to get to this question. Thank you, whoever asked it. But somebody's here. David Escobar is with us from the city of Dayton. There is an amazing startup called Elevate Dayton that I've been engaged with. Incredible young African-American entrepreneurs who want to solve the local news crisis. So they're focusing on small business, focusing on public health. They're doing a great job in Dayton. So absolutely, not just mainstream press. I'm in Aurora, Colorado today with the Aurora Sentinel. We're going to start promoting ACP. So I would absolutely reach out. I would host a meeting with local news outlets, public radio, talk radio, church circulators, whoever actually puts information in front of folks, but especially journalists, local television. One example, in Birmingham, Alabama, we had the local ABC affiliate did a whole series of promos that they then ran in prime time promoting the project. So there's all kinds of easy asks here. Again, you got to be creative about thinking about them. And I love the idea of plugging in ethnic media because they have strong relationships of trust in their communities, especially when you get to immigrant communities or multi-language English learning communities. So great question. Absolutely. And I put my email in the chat. If you want to talk more about that any day of the week, email me.
Yeah. And I'll add to that. There are a number of coalitions and nonprofit organizations nationally, many leaders in this space that have been engaged in digital literacy efforts and adoption efforts for many years that are leading similar efforts. And in the same way, a lot of the infrastructure that we're talking about today helps support some of those folks, right? So you may have an organization that has one-to-one, door-to-door outreach. Adding a call center to that can help with marketing and communications efforts and branding. All of that is also possible with the framework that we're talking about today. So it's not only a partnership that is available for cities, but also a partnership that we can deploy with other nonprofit organizations that are doing outreach in their communities for ACP and really quickly set up infrastructure to be able to do that outbound and inbound outreach.
Yeah. Lauda, this may have been not obvious to everyone, but when Josh mentioned the posters, I mean, this is nitty gritty stuff, but like they said, hey, when you drop your kids off, especially during the pandemic, you don't get out of the car anymore. And also, as your kids get older, mines are out of the house. You really don't want to walk them into the school anymore. So we printed out vinyl posters in English and Spanish, and they, put them on every single fence at the drop-off zones. So again, just thinking creatively about points of contact, and it's everything that you can think of, including like we, had little inserts in free lunch bags, because in Alabama, when the schools were shut down, they had the bus drivers in the rural, extremely poor parts of Alabama were still driving free lunches around and dropping them off at households because people needed that food. Mm-hmm. So guess what? One of the superintendents down there, he had like 800 students total, said, do me this, send me a flyer that will fit in this lunch bag and I will put it in every single lunch. And they did that for a week, and we got the numbers through the roof in that community.
Just really quickly for Esperanza, I'm going to combine two questions. So we have some folks asking if these programs are available for the disability community. The short answer, I think, obviously being yes. But if you could talk a little bit about, just give a little bit more details about eligibility. And then relatedly, do we work with Braille?
Okay, so with Braille, yes, they can request there's a wide variety, like bold print, large print, Braille, lots of different specific necessary applications that they need. They can request that information from FCC and receive that in the mail to assist them with applying for this. So yes, there are ways for everyone and anyone to apply for this program. And as far as, I'm sorry, can you please go back to what was the other part of the question?
So just if you could really quickly just remind folks about what the eligibility requirements are for the program.
Yes. So eligibility is very broad. So there is the 200% of the poverty level one. There are a number of ways that they can apply, which are become eligible, which are on the website. So one is if a child receives a free or reduced school lunch or breakfast, they qualify. If they receive any kind of assistance from programs such as SNAP, EBT, WIC, Lifeline, they would be eligible. All of the eligibility requirements and qualifications are listed on the website, and the majority of people in our communities will be eligible for this. They just need to go on to the website and apply.
Great. Just really quickly, as we have about 5 minutes, so I'm wondering if Joanne can tackle this one. We have some folks that want to hear a little bit more about Alabama and some of the efforts there and what they look like.
So what happened in Alabama is that in the early months of the pandemic, Governor Ivey recognized that school was unlikely to open in August of 2020. And that there was going to be this ongoing crisis of education if distance learning was not made available to all of the students in the state. And obviously the last semester of the 2019-2020 school year had been disrupted, but the thought of an entire school year being disrupted was particularly problematic. Congress had not yet made the appropriation for either the Emergency Broadband Benefit or the Affordable Connectivity Program, which came the following year. So the state of Alabama actually allocated $100 million to support low-income students throughout the state. And many of the strategies and the techniques that we're talking about today were developed there as part of that program to create this whole new way of providing opportunity for low-income students. It was actually, I won't go into detail about these elements, but it's kind of a remarkable program with the local ISPs in particular, the internet service providers, really stepping up as partners to the state and wanting to solve this problem also and serve the households in their communities. And as a result of this effort and the outreach effort that was associated with it, including standing up the call center, making outbound calls, getting inbound calls, and this huge educational effort to alert families that they were eligible for this program. As a result of that, there were 207,000 low-income students connected. for the 2020-2021 school year. And then as that school year ended, those families were transitioned by the call center calling them from the Alabama funded program to the Emergency Broadband Benefit funded by Congress, and then to the Affordable Connectivity Program. And then there was a continued outreach effort by Alabama agencies. It's a partnership of the Department of Economic and Community Affairs and then the State Department of Education to try to get more families signed up. So an ongoing structured effort to think about this in a consistent and ongoing way. It's not a short-term problem. This is not something that we are going to solve in and be done with. I think the Alabama experience shows how efforts from the early part of 2020 are paying dividends in 2022 and will continue to do so as long as the Affordable Connectivity Program exists. But it's meant ongoing and sustained attention to the issue. And fortunately, thanks to the state of Alabama and then the state of New Mexico and all of their partners, and there are hundreds and hundreds of partners, the school districts, the local nonprofits, the libraries, the school principals who put in all of the effort, and the superintendents. But thanks to all of them, there is now a substantial body of information and work around best practices for outreach for, I think, one of the most challenging things we do in broadband and internet policy, which is reach the folks who have been toughest to reach and have been left behind by the internet economy.
Thanks, Joanne. So we're reaching our mark. I want to close out by thanking all of you for taking the time to join us today. We are going to follow up. You're going to see some links in the chat, but you'll receive, if you signed up for this webinar today, you'll receive a follow-up email with additional resources. And then another thing I just wanted to say to close out is that you actually do have resources available to you to set this up. So a lot of cities, you are able to leverage a lot of those infrastructure dollars and ARPA dollars to think about some of these strategies and implementing them into your broadband infrastructure strategies. And we encourage you to look at that, but we also can help walk you through what that could look like and how do you pull additional resources to make this a reality. And as your cities are also thinking through your digital equity strategies, to think through a lot of the conversation today and what it will take to get there. And again, additional resources also coming through the IIJA and infrastructure bills for digital equity plans and strategies, and for you to be able to implement those to make sure everybody has meaningful access to the internet. So we're really grateful to have all of you here today, and our panelists really grateful that you took the time to be with us, share your expertise. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.